the Pledge for Change. My name is Amitabh Behar. I work as the Executive Director of Oxfam International. I live in Delhi and Nairobi, so I'm not very sure where I actually live. I'm constantly shuttling between the two with my family in Delhi and workspace much more in Nairobi. I'm really delighted to be here, and a very warm welcome to all of you. This is the third time that we are coming together. And before we get into that, I just wanted to say that I'm personally very excited to join this group. As an individual, the ideas behind Pledge for Change have been driving me for decades. So I really feel that for me, my personal mission in what I do is about social justice and human rights. And I do see civil society broadly as the vehicle through which we can deliver it. But I also see that the broad aid architecture as the way it's designed currently as an obstruction to it. And therefore, I'm personally very committed. But I'm very fortunate that now I work for an organization, Oxfam, which is equally committed to this change. So we are at the moment, Oxfam, and you'll see our reports, we'll talk about it. We are deeply committed to the idea of transforming how we show up in different spaces, how we are structured, how we function. But let me also say that there are challenges in how we do that. So this is really a space where Oxfam feels privileged to be part of, and we gain a lot from coming here. So thank you for having us and creating this space together. This is the third time we are gathering as online, and this has been happening every year around this time. 2 years ago, it was in November. Last year, it was in October. Again, we are meeting early November. In between, we have met twice face-to-face. And let me also say, you must have noticed that earlier this was called a retreat. But there's an intentional change from retreat to it's a global gathering. It's a clear recognition that what we're doing is not about retreating. It's about moving forward. So it's an intentional change. I hope we can absorb it and keep it in the spirit of this conversation. I also want to acknowledge that we as a group are trying to do this differently, and we are broadening the possibilities for our participants to come and join this conversation. And we are doing it now in 2 different time zones. So at this moment, we are together from Asia and Pacific. I hope that a few others from Africa and Europe, the early birds, are joining us. But then we'll have another conversation, which will be more for the Europe, Africa, and Americas. This hopefully gives everybody the opportunity to have an engaged conversation. Another additional feature, I would say, and this is based on our learning from the previous conversations, is that we heard a lot of our conversations were becoming headquartered centered. And there's a clear attempt to move away from that headquartered centered conversation. Mm-hmm. And I'm very happy to note that now this time we have several other colleagues from countries and regions who are going to be joining us, because that's where we really see the change happening and the change is required the most. So this is, again, another shift. So those 2 shifts are something which is very important that I wanted to talk of how we are organizing these conversations. So at this moment, we are 13 signatories and 61 supporter organizations, which is significant. And people are joining in this conversation at different moments. But we just wanted to assure, some of us might feel, I have come into the conversation fairly recently, but we wanted to assure that This is not going to be a conversation which is built on previous conversations in terms of one needs to be an insider to engage with the conversation. What we really need is if there is a commitment to the core values of Pledge for Change, which is essentially the value of solidarity, equality, humility, and self-determination, I think we can really build a very strong, engaging conversation and a meaningful conversation which will uh, take us forward. So everybody who's showed up even just today as your first engagement with Pledge for Change, it's great that you're here, and let's work together. In this conversation today, in both the sessions, what we are trying to do is essentially three things. One, ensure that the values that I talked of are not just values which are written on paper, but we actually have a touch and feel of those values. I think it's really critical. What do those values mean to us? How do we absorb them? So that's one, an attempt through these conversations to ensure that those values come alive. Second, we would, and that's something that we've been saying, that we need to also report back honestly, transparently about the movement that has happened in the last couple of years. And the third is to also, I think that is something that we sometimes forget, to celebrate the achievements that we have had. We have moved ahead. Let's celebrate that. Let's celebrate and inspire others to follow the action that has been taken. But before we get into this space, I think it's critical for us to at least take note of why we are doing this, and why are we here together? What's the external world telling us? What's the reality in which we are operating? So let me just, kind of just flag some realities of our world. I'm sure everybody's aware of this. This is an engaged group, but just to set the context, you would have seen our Oxfam inequality reports. One of the highlights that we have from this year, which I think is in itself disturbing, that since 2020, pretty much around the time we started thinking about this Pledge for Change, you have 5 billionaires double their wealth, whereas 5 billion people, 60% of the global population, has become poorer. Just absorb that. In the last 4 years since COVID, the billionaires, which is like 3,000 people, largely men, sitting in the north, have added $3 trillion to their wealth. On the other hand, you have around 850 million people sleeping hungry, literally sleeping hungry. So that's the level of inequality. I was in South Sudan, at the border of Sudan and South Sudan. It was heart-wrenching to see the constant influx of both refugees and returnees. But what was surprising for me, that many of them were actually escaping even climate catastrophe, which I had not kind of absorbed till I was there. Climate catastrophe is a reality, and you're seeing climate refugees all around us. And while I'm talking of all this, obviously on top of our mind is, just imagine in the last 1 year, as I said, I live in Delhi. Delhi is 30 to 40 square kilometers, and Gaza is of the similar size. And in the last 1 year, we have seen almost 12,000 children killed, 40,000 people killed. We're looking at forced starvation in Gaza. That's what we are seeing in the world at the moment, that we are forcing a community, people, to be starving. And this is not just now Gaza. We are seeing that in West Bank. We are seeing the escalation in Lebanon and across. And this is a story, heart-wrenching, heartbreaking, but sadly, it's just growing. Whether you go to, I talked of Sudan, whether you go to Congo, whether you look at DRC, whether you look at Ukraine, it continues. What essentially we are seeing is a completely broken global security architecture, global governance architecture. At the moment, I would say it's completely failed. It's broken. And what we then see is what often is called a polycrisis. And I talked of it, the climate crisis, the inequality crisis, the food crisis, the hunger crisis. But to my mind, they're just different manifestations. They're not polycrisis. They're different manifestations of the same root cause of the kind of economic and political order we have created. And that's something that needs to be fundamentally changed. And let's be honest, the aid architecture created over the last several decades, in many ways, is complicit in this whole architecture. It does not have really the space or the courage to challenge the failures that I talked of. The inherent racism in what is happening in Gaza, the fault lines that are clear to call out inequality. And that must change. That must fundamentally change. And that's what we are trying to do here. And we are trying to do that with this recognition of the failure of the aid architecture, the huge challenges we have, and essentially we are therefore looking at, as everybody joining this conversation would know, we are looking at equitable partnerships. We are looking at authentic storytelling and influencing wider change. So those are three streams and around which we have even organized our work streams. So this is what we are trying to do. Our attempt has been to constantly come back honestly, sincerely, to engage, to share our realities, our vulnerabilities, to be able to learn and to move ahead. So that's a conversation I hope we are able to do. But let's do that with the values that I talked of. And I think those values are so critical. And I was just thinking that the entire architecture will not work if you don't have those values of humility, self-determination, solidarity, and equality. So let's have a good conversation, engaging conversation. Let's be willing to ask tough questions of each other, but with empathy, solidarity, and humility. So that's the conversation. It's a tough time for the world, and I don't think that we have really options of not moving ahead or even moving slowly. We need to engage with this conversation with our heart, mind, and hands, everything, and move ahead. So thank you for joining. A very warm welcome. Back to you, Mary.